Hello everybody, this is Chris Kaptein for aetutsplus.com, and today we're going to be making this noise meter animation. And this is actually based on a recent real-life project of mine. I was recently hired to make some animations for a local hockey team that would be played on the big scoreboard screen, and they wanted a noise meter animation. And I don't know about you, but when I first saw these noise meter animations at live events and stuff, I actually thought they were actual functioning noise meters. But I was shocked to learn that's not the case. I remember when my boss approached me about this and he said, Chris, we need you to make a noise meter for the hockey team. I said, I don't know if I can do that. That's going to take some programming and stuff that, I'm not really into. I'm an After Effects guy. And he said, basically, no, you genius. It's just an animation. So there you go. Shocking news for everybody. But good news for us After Effects users. So let's just go over the main points of what we're going to be covering here. We have this housing, which is actually containing our meter. We have these dancing LED lights that are slowly getting higher and higher. And then at the end is where all the action happens. And you can see that we've got some Video Copilot's Action Essentials 2 elements going on in here. And we have some camera shake, and then we have this cool glass breaking effect here. So you can see when the glass cracks here, we can actually see the glass refracting, and just gives it a little bit more of a realistic look. So here I am in After Effects, but we're actually going to be starting in Photoshop to create our LED lights. So I'm going to make a new Photoshop document, and I'm going to make it 50 pixels by 500 pixels. And that should give us a nice tall document to create our lights. I'm going to fill the background with 50% gray, and I'm just going to use the shape tool to make ourselves some LED lights. So I'm just using the rectangle tool here, and I'll just make myself a little rectangle, and I want it to be a nice bright green color. And actually what I should do first is use my guides to kind of set where I want the red lights to start and where I want the yellow ones to start. Alright, going back into the square, I'm just going to apply some layer styles. So I'll give it a bevel and emboss. I'll decrease the transparency of the shadows just because it's a light, so shadows shouldn't show up very much. And how you design the light is up to you. You can make it kind of like a bulgy round light like that, or a square light sort of like that. I'm actually going to stick with that look, and I'm also going to give it an outer glow, and I'll make it also a nice bright green color. Switch the mode to normal. Okay. So there we have our first LED light, and basically what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to duplicate this layer. So with the layer selected, I'm going to hold Alt or Option and just start clicking and dragging. And don't worry if you mess up the alignment or spacing like I am. We can use the alignment and spacing tools later on once we're done. So when I get to here, I'm just going to make this one yellow. So I'll click on the color swatch there, and I'll make it a nice yellow color. And I'll also make the outer glow yellow. And I'll just keep going on here with my alt clicking and dragging. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to align the layers properly. So over here in my layers panel, I'm going to select all the layers by clicking on the top layer, scrolling down, shift clicking on the bottom layer, and I'm going to click align horizontally, and I'm going to distribute evenly vertically. And then I'll just use my arrow tools. So we have a pretty simple LED light meter here, so I'll just go ahead and save this as a Photoshop file. Then back here in After Effects, I'm going to import that file as a composition with cropped layers, and I'll merge the layer styles into the footage. Alright, so basically what we're going to do is we're just going to animate each one of these on appearing starting from the bottom to the top. So what I'm going to do is actually we don't need the background anymore. I'll just delete that layer. And I'll select all the layers starting from the bottom, scrolling up and holding the shift key and selecting the top layer. That selects all the layers. And then keeping the playhead on frame 0, I'm going to hold Alt and the out square bracket, which will basically make everything, all of the layers, only one frame. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Animation, Keyframe Assistant, Sequence Layers. And this will actually do it in the order that you selected, so it's very important that you select it from bottom to top. And then no overlap, I'll say OK. And then keeping the layers selected, I'm just going to scroll my playhead again to about 1 second and 10 frames, and then I will hold Alt or Option and again the closing square bracket just to make everything end right there. I'll click End to make the composition end there, and I'll trim that comp. So what we have now is basically this animation of the lights appearing one frame after the other, and that's it. That's the hardest part. What we're basically going to be doing is using time remapping to kind of wiggle these frames and make the LED meter kind of dance as it gets to the top. So let me show you what I mean by that. I'm going to make a new composition and I will call it LED Show. And let's make it 600 pixels by 300 pixels. And I'm going to grab this LED thing that we just made and I'll scale it down so it fits better. Alright, so first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to enable time remapping by right-clicking on it, clicking on time, and enable time remapping. And it gives me these frames here, and I can actually stretch these frames out, so I'm going to stretch it out to about 20 seconds. So now when the animation plays, it just kind of slowly plays one frame after the other. But if we add the wiggle expression to this animation, it will look a lot smoother. So I'm going to alt click on the stopwatch for time remapping, and I'm going to add the wiggle expression here. Wiggle, open parentheses, let's say 9, comma, and the second value in the wiggle expression represents how much it will wiggle. So if you want it to wiggle like 15 frames, you have to give it 0.5, which is half a second. If you want to kind of keep it easier in your head, like I do, I just enter in another math equation here, 4 divided by 30, because we're working at 30 frames per second, so that will be 4 frames. And don't forget that second closing bracket. So now if we look at the animation, we can see that it's actually wiggling the frames as it gets higher and higher. And if we keep watching near the end, when it starts getting into the red zone, it stays here for a little bit and then it starts flashing. And what's happening there is basically it's wiggling past the last frame here. And it's basically just rendering a blank frame. So what you can do to fix that is you can just extend these layers past the end here, or you can make an expression, add to the expression here to kind of limit the wiggle. But in this case, I actually think it will kind of work because we're trying to destroy the noise meter, right? So having these LEDs flashing near the end might actually add to the effect. So we can actually kind of manipulate this time remapping a little bit more. Like say we want the noise to kind of come in quickly at the start. I'll just grab a frame here and move it closer to the beginning. So it goes up higher at the beginning and then slows down. And I think I'm going to grab another frame closer to the end and just kind of push it towards the end so that we stay in this middle area a little bit longer and then suddenly get to the top. So you don't want to keep the animation more than probably 20 seconds just because you don't want the crowd to lose interest, right? I mean, they are screaming at the top of their lungs, so just keep it pretty short. Alright, so we have the noise meter building quickly at the start and then kind of hanging around this middle area for a little while and getting louder and louder, and the crowd is cheering louder and louder, trying to push that meter up. And then once we start getting into the red, it hangs up there for a little while and then it starts flashing. So that's pretty much all you need to do. So I'm going to go ahead and trim this down to 20 seconds. And then really all you need to do is start duplicating this and making as many bands as you want. So I'm just going to hit Command D or Control D to start making these. And again, don't worry about the distribution or alignment, we can always fix it later. Alright, so I've made 16 of these, and as you can see each one has its own individual wiggle, so that's really what's going to sell this thing. I'm going to select all the layers and then going to Window, Align and Distribute. So I'm going to align all the layers on the bottom and distribute evenly. And I might actually scale them up, so I'll just hit Scale. And I just want them to fill as much of this as possible. If I want to spread them out a little bit more, all I have to do is grab the first one and the last one, select them all again and distribute them again, and align them again. Alright, so let's take a quick look at what we have so far. Alright, so they're climbing, and each one has its own wiggle, so it looks very natural. So we're getting louder and louder into the yellow now, and then pretty soon we should be getting into the red. So once they climb to the top, they should stay still for a while. The noise is just too much and it starts flashing like crazy. So I'm pretty happy with that. At this point I want to mention that this is not the only style of meter you can do. I was experimenting with some other animations, I guess you could say, and based on what I've seen at other events and just my own kind of ideas. So, but it's basically using the same thing. So I made this dial sort of noise meter basically the same way. So I just animated the rotation on this arrow and then basically did the same thing with the time remapping, and then designed this little background thing in Photoshop. It's true I could just wiggle the rotation, but I just wanted to show you guys that there's other things you could do. So we basically have a noise meter that's acting more like a gauge. So that's one idea. And another thing that I was playing with was this idea. So same kind of idea, I just took this gradient bar that I made in Photoshop or whatever, and I applied a linear wipe to it. That's all that happens. So the same thing here, if you apply some time remapping and duplicate the layer, you basically get this sort of like old school Winamp visualizer, right? And I mean, there's nothing that says you have to have a vertical meter. Why not make a horizontal meter, right? So I'd really encourage you guys to kind of try different styles, try different meters, and just play with different animations and see what you can come up with. It's basically doing the same thing. You're using time remapping to wiggle the frames of a pre-comp. Anyway, back here in our LED show, I'm going to go ahead and make a background. So I'll make a new solid, and let's make it a dark green solid. We won't go black. And then what we're going to do is we're going to make another new solid, and I'll go to Effect, Generate, and Grid. So we have a nice little grid here, and I'm going to set the blending mode here to soft light, and I'm just going to put these layers at the bottom. Alright, so now I can adjust my grid here. I'll set the border to 3. I will size from width and height sliders, and I'll set the anchor down here in the center. And I'm going to make this quite wide, this grid. Alright, that's pretty good. So it's like the grid is sort of indicating where are the lows, the low mids, the high mids, and the high frequencies, if you like. Alright, and I'll just drop the transparency on this grid a little bit. And I'm going to make another new solid. This one I'll make it black, and I will generate a ramp here. And I'll make it a radial ramp. I'll switch the colors here. And I'll just stretch it way out. And I'll set the blend mode to this layer to multiply. So basically we just kind of want to give the illusion that there might be a light source coming from the top, or I don't know. The last thing I'm going to do is make a glare on the screen. So I'll make a nice light green solid here. And I'll put a nice big mask on the top. Hit MM to get my mask properties. Feather it quite a bit. Hit T to get the transparency and lower the transparency. Just to make a nice subtle glare. Alright, so that looks pretty good. Now we have a lot of stuff going on in this composition. We have 16 duplicates of this LED show, and there's 23 layers inside of each one. So there's a lot of animation going on and a lot of math. So I would recommend rendering this out as a proxy or as a movie, just because once we start adding on more layers and stuff, it's really going to bog down your system. So I've already gone ahead and rendered out a ping sequence that we're going to use later. But now I'd like to go over how to create this sort of housing for the noise meter. And I just want to say that there are literally an infinite number of ways that you guys can do this. This is really an opportunity in the tutorial where you guys can let your own design skills shine. I mean, you don't have to do this sort of grungy kind of style, right? There's lots of tutorials out there on how to make like user interfaces and gauges. You know, you can draw one yourself, you can use photos like I did, or you can make it in a 3D application, which is what I actually did for our original client. Don't think you have to limit yourself to this style of noise meter. I mean, obviously you're going to have to match the style of your client's needs. If you're doing a sports team, you know, you can match their colors or whatever. So I'm just going to go over quickly how I made this one in Photoshop. And I'm going to be really quick about this just because, like I say, I'd like you guys to really let your own design skills shine at this point. So for this, basically what I did is I went to CG Textures and I grabbed a bunch of textures from their site. And I started with this, which is the back of a container, I guess. And basically I just used my selection tool and I cut out this area here to make myself a frame. And then because I wanted this kind of thick section to be at the bottom, what I did is I crushed it down like so, and I just blended it using the eraser tool. And paid a little bit of extra attention here because I wanted the stickers to show through because I thought they were kind of cool. And then basically I just merged it down and flipped it upside down, so I had this nice little thick section here. And then I brought it into a new document to kind of assemble it all together. And for the glass, let me show you the textures that I grabbed for that. The glass is actually made up of two textures. There's this sort of clean glass. I just grabbed this pane right here. And then there's this sort of grungy glass, and I think I grabbed this one right here. And basically I just put them together, and I hope you guys can kind of see what's happening here. This is the grungy one, right? And I used the eraser tool to kind of take it down in the middle there. And then this is the clean glass. And if I put them together, I kind of get this sort of really cool, grungy looking, you know, glass. And then I brought in a frame from the ping sequence that I just rendered just to check and see how it looks, and it looks alright to me. And then I grabbed some pipe textures. So these are the textures that I grabbed. So starting with these sort of heating ducts, I guess. I sort of copied them and pasted them in here. And then this one, I grabbed a couple of pipes from here and pasted them in as well. And you can see that I used some adjustment just to make everything a little bit darker, just so that the grungy detail would come through a little bit more. And then I just threw a text layer on top, just so everybody would know that it's a noise meter, right? So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to merge everything down as best as I can. I'm just selecting the layers here and hitting Command or Control E to merge it down. For the glass, I'm going to set the blending mode to screen, and I'll just bring down the opacity a little bit. Alright. And I will go ahead and save that. Back here in After Effects, I'm going to import it as a composition with cropped layers, and I'll merge styles into footage. Alright. So I've got these layers here, and basically we're going to do all of the destruction right here in this composition. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to swap out this meter layer for our actual animation that we just rendered. So I'll hold Alt and click and drag onto this meter layer. So now we have our actual animation here.